Assalamu alaikum, I'm Munize Jahangir and you're watching the last episode of Sarhad Ke Us Paar. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires and it has swallowed yet another one. As the international forces exit next year, it is leaving behind an insurgent Taliban, a weak economy and state institutions that may or may not be able to bring peace to a people who desperately want it. Neighboring Pakistan too has paid a heavy price. We have spent millions of dollars, lost thousands of lives, and we are still battling with determined militants and radicalism that eats away at the fabric of our society. What will happen post-2014 when international forces leave Afghanistan? Will the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan be strengthened, defeated, or reconciled? Will the forces who have an interest in supporting extremism win over the forces who want transition to sustainable democracy in both countries? Will the region be able to, and regional players be able to pull themselves out of this quagmire towards economic prosperity and reconcile their political differences to avoid the chaos of the 1980s? To answer all of these questions, I have with me here former Minister of Parliament Bushra Gohar, who is the Senior Vice President of the Awami National Party, a party that was in power in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. She has represented the civil society and government of Pakistan in the United Nations and other international forums on several occasions. She is one of the few bold voices against radicalism in Pakistan. Seated right next to her, Mr. Najmuddin Sheikh, a former Pakistani diplomat who stayed as Foreign Secretary of Pakistan from 1994 to 1997. He has served as Pakistan's ambassador to Canada, West Germany, United States and Iran. Mr. Sheikh has been on the Board of Governors of the Institute of Strategic Studies in Islamabad and is Senior Vice President of the Karachi Council of Foreign Relations. He has also written many articles on foreign relations in the Pakistani press. We have a hand-picked audience and students. Amongst them, a face that is recognized on both sides of the divide, a well-known journalist, Kathy Gannon. She has been consistently reporting on the Taliban for many years, is a special regional correspondent for Afghanistan and Pakistan for Associated Press in Pakistan, and is also the author of Eye for Infidel, From Holy War to Holy Terror. With that, I will hand over to you, Mr. Sultan Zoy in Kabul. Who do you have over there?
Thank you, Munize. I would like to introduce my guests in Afghanistan, Mr. Rahmatullah Nabil, the former Chief of Intelligence of Afghanistan and presently the Deputy National Security Advisor to the President. We have Mr. Wali Masood, the former Afghan Ambassador to the United Kingdom, and Mr. Hikmat Karzai, who heads a think tank, Conflict and Peace Studies in Afghanistan. Before
we begin our show and we allow our guests to speak to each other, Mr. Sultan Zoy, we have seen how President Karzai has gone to Qatar and he has softened his stance on the Taliban, saying that the Taliban leader Mullah Umar is welcome to contest even presidential elections, and also saying that the Taliban have never been a preventive element in Afghanistan's economic progress. On the other hand, we have not seen the Taliban move an inch from their position. They continue to say that they do not recognize the Afghan government. So how come there is a softening of the Karzai government's stance on the Taliban? What has brought this about? And my question is addressed to Mr. Nabil.
I think both our guests can address this because your expertise is in this field. So you can both take this question.
It is wonderful to see you, Sheikh Saib. Regarding the question on softening of the position, I personally believe there hasn't been any change in the position. I think if you look at President Karzai's remarks, you will always find that he has addressed the violent opposition with brothers. He has always allowed them an opportunity to take part in the political process. So at least regarding this comment, I don't really see any change in this. Also, the media has also taken his comment out of context. This is at least in my opinion. He has said if the local population does not have any grievance, he is most welcome to run for any political seat.
I don't want to take too long, Manizia. I would come back to you so you can take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan Zoy. There is a realization in Pakistan that we've all made mistakes in the past. And if my panelists allow, I will go straight away to Ms. Kathy Gannon, who is a reporter and has been reporting on the reconciliation with the Taliban.
That there has been a change of the Taliban's position. In Mullah Omar's Eid statement, he did say that for the first time that the Taliban did not want to monopolize power, they did not want a civil war, that they were ready to share power. I don't say that, you know, that's a starting point, but that's a change. And I think President Karzai has realized that. I think on all sides in the negotiations right now, the problem is I don't want to talk to this one doesn't want to talk to that one. There hasn't been a substantive proposal on, okay, what are you negotiating about? They've all agreed they want to negotiate. President Karzai has said he doesn't want the Taliban talking to anybody but his government, and he has a point there. But the Taliban are already talking to everybody. The government in Afghanistan today will change in 2014. There is an office in Qatar. That office is to allow negotiations. It's broken off with the Americans. They say they won't talk to President Karzai. They're talking with some of the opposition or the opposition. That there should be maybe, or that it's possible maybe to have all of these players together in a place like Qatar.
Right.
You have to get to some substantive, I think, position.
All right. So what Kathy over there is saying is that there isn't a substantive proposal now with the reconciliation process with the Taliban, whether it's the Afghans talking to the Taliban, the Americans talking to the Taliban, or the Pakistanis talking to the Taliban. What is holding us all back from a substantive proposal?
Perhaps it's right to say that at the moment nothing is happening in terms of substantive progress towards substantive negotiations. Kathy suggested, and I think this should be borne in mind, while I appreciate President Karzai's position that it is his government with whom, and his High Peace Council with whom negotiations should take place, perhaps there should not be a total bar on the Taliban talking to a wider range, including the loyal opposition in Afghanistan. As Kathy pointed out, in 2014 there's going to be a change of government.
All right.
So we have to think in a rather larger context of how these negotiations can move forward.
All right, quickly to you, Bushra, and then we'll go back to Kabul. There is an accusation that comes from the other side of the divide saying that Pakistan has a role in sabotaging the peace process with the Taliban. Do you believe that Pakistan really is sabotaging the peace process with the Taliban? Because on the other hand, we have seen a paradigm shift in the establishment's perception of Afghanistan. It seems that they are now wanting to talk to other groups than just the Taliban. They've recognized that they may be backing the wrong horse, that they want, and we've heard General Kayani, Chief of Army Staff, saying that they want an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned peace process.
There might have been a slight shift, but I personally feel that right now we have to review our own policies and articulate them well. I mean, as far as we are concerned, we believe that any interference in Afghanistan's affairs is not in our interest, in Pakistan's interest. We have to accept Afghanistan as a sovereign state.
Have we done that? Or are we in the process of it?
We are in the process, but I think we need to further articulate our policies. Also that we have a certain...
Who's going to do that?
Well, you see, this takes a while. We have to... There's a lot of, things that the Parliament should have taken care of. We are in a transition right now. Anyway, I feel that we've actually got a bigger mess in our own house as a result of it. It is right time to actually say, and for us also, we are talking about talking to the Taliban, but we have certain conditions for that. We're saying that, if they renounce violence, if they accept the constitution, we can sit with them. I'm not sure about the conditions on the other side, and I'm also not very sure about this venue of Qatar for this whole process. And then do we say that the Taliban's on this side and that side are different? They're the same as far as we are concerned. They're basically connected. They're the same. They have their...
So we need to have a more holistic approach.
Absolutely,
all right,
yeah.
Let me go with that and over to Mr. Sultan Zoy. What Bushra Gohar over here is saying is that we need to have a holistic approach to the way we deal with the Taliban. But the really big question is that why should the Taliban strike a deal with an army or with international forces that are about to leave. There is a perception that how would you make that deal stick in the first place? And I could address that question to Ambassador Masood there.
We really have to say it very frankly that which side the Taliban came from and who are the Taliban, who they have been supporting for, and which country or which section have supported the Taliban. We really have to state that fact, then we can come to the conclusion. But now, let me just say about this peace initiative and peace program of our government as well as the Pakistani government. Let me say that if the Taliban is a, so-called, if it's a proxy, or if it's a terrorist group,
movement,
or Islamic group, the problem is that whether the two governments of Pakistan and Afghanistan, do they have the will and the program to solve their differences?
Thank you. Mr. Nabil, Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, Tehreek-e-Taliban SWAT, and the Haqqani network, are these groups coordinated, and are they all under the same umbrella? And what does that mean for the future of the region? If we're trying to work together as two nations, where do these fit?
The end of 2009, 2010, when the attention was diverted once again to Afghanistan, then the pressure was increased on these all good Taliban who were created by the name of good Taliban inside Afghanistan. And some of them were not managed to come back, and they expand their own era in different parts of Pakistan.
Where are the good Taliban now?
Just, you know, nobody can say these are good Taliban, these are bad Taliban. But unfortunately, there are some perception, the other side of the border, that these are good Taliban, these are bad Taliban. Hafiz Gul Bahadur is good Talib because he's killing people inside Afghanistan, not Pakistan.
He's actually killed Pakistani soldiers on the Pakistan side.
Yeah, that's unless we don't eliminate this perception and come up with one strategy to have peace and reconciliation.
You're talking about one strategy by both nations, by both governments?
By both nations.
What Mr. Nabil over there said, good Taliban, bad Taliban, the fact remains that on either side of the divide, your government, previously your government and their government is willing to talk and negotiate with the Taliban. So were these the good Taliban or the bad Taliban that we are now negotiating with?
Well, our position, and I can just tell you about the ANP's position, is that there is no such thing as good, bad or ugly Taliban. They're all the same and they're all in it together. So we need to actually stop differentiating between the good and the bad and the ugly. The Western powers actually added to this confusion by starting this whole debate about good Talibans and bad Talibans. And I feel that, you know, that gave, and that became pretty dangerous, because what is good for one may be bad for the other. I think there's far too much focus on talking to the Taliban.
What should be done then?
Not talking to the people. This is, and there are other groups other than the Taliban who are living in Afghanistan who may not want or care for the Talibans or these talks with the Talibans, and there are groups here in Pakistan also. We need to engage with them rather than just focusing very narrowly on these talks with the good, bad and ugly. I feel that there is a trust deficit that needs to be addressed. We need, from both sides of the divide, which, you know, the issue that I took up earlier was that you can't just shed the baggage of the past.
Let me go forward with that. She's made a very important point. She's saying that basically you need to speak to other groups other than the Taliban. But the problem here is that it's the Taliban who are up in arms on both sides of the divide.
I understand that, but look, what I'm trying to suggest is that the first thing we need to do is get over the misunderstandings and miscommunications between the two governments.
And how do we do that?
Well, let me first give you an example that we have one take on the trilateral in London, the Afghans have another. Second, when we talk about groups, obviously we've talked about the Taliban, but the starting point in terms of terrorism is Al-Qaeda. Now, the Americans may say that there are only 50 or 60 Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and there are 100 or more on Pakistan side of the border. But I think that we have to take account of how much there is by way of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, how much there is by way of the Chechens, etc., who incidentally have no interest in peace. They have no prospect of returning to their homes.
So we have to take a short break over here, but these are important questions that you have raised, and we will raise those questions after this short break. We will ask exactly what will happen to all those foreign militant groups who are based in North Waziristan once we are at 2014. Will these groups change their strategy? What will happen to the nature of militancy in Afghanistan and Pakistan? We don't just share a common border, we also share militancy and extremism. All of that after this short break.